There are growing concerns among aid groups about the scarcity of food in Gaza.
Just yesterday, dozens of Palestinians were killed as they waited to get food aid from humanitarian groups. Fox's Scott Gernal with the growing food shortages and widespread hunger.
As fears of hunger in Gaza grow, countries are calling for an end to the war. In a joint statement Monday, 25 nations, including Britain and France, described recent deaths in the territory as, quote, horrifying.
The situation on the ground in Gaza is intolerable on so many levels.
According to the Gaza Health Ministry, at least 67 Palestinians were killed in the northern strip on Sunday as they attempted to access food from United Nations aid trucks.
We were waiting for flour because of hunger. We wanted to eat and drink. Suddenly the tanks came out surrounding us. They started shooting at us and we were unable to move.
The Israeli military says troops fired warning shots toward the crowd to remove a, quote, immediate threat, and said it, quote, certainly does not intentionally target humanitarian aid trucks. Humanitarian workers are warning that hundreds of people in Gaza could die from a scarcity of food. The World Food Program says nearly 1 in 3 people there are not eating for days at a time.
The situation here is absolutely dire. The situation in Gaza has never been this bad. They are desperately hungry.
Another growing concern among aid groups is Israel issuing new evacuation orders for parts of central Gaza, an area where ground troops rarely operate and many international organizations are located.
There's 2 million people in Gaza on the brink of famine. We need the humanitarian community to be allowed to do our jobs.
Gernal Scott, Fox News.
All right, for more perspective now on the situation unfolding in Gaza, let's bring in Stephen Zunes, professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco. Professor, it's good to see you. Thank you for the time, as always, here. And let's start, if we could, with this joint statement that was put out by more than 24 countries calling for an end to the fighting in Gaza. What kind of an impact do you think a statement like that, a unified statement like this, may have on Israel? Do you think it might prompt them to shift their approach, at least to how humanitarian aid is delivered to Gaza?
It's one of a number of initiatives. This is significant because it includes some major countries that have historically been close to Israel, who do not have any particular anti-Israel bias in their policies. Yet they recognize the incredibly horrific humanitarian crisis. But the United States refused to be part of this effort. The Trump administration and congressional leaders of both parties seem to be continuing to support Israel's war effort. And as long as the United States refuses to put pressure on Israel, such as threatening to withhold certain offensive military aid and that kind of thing, it's doubtful that Israel will pay much attention to these other nations and their initiatives.
Yeah, and this statement obviously spotlights the way that Israel is delivering humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, calling the aid delivery model dangerous here. And obviously we saw the attack, and we just heard about the attack that happened over the weekend. What obligations does Israel have to help Gazans under international humanitarian law? What is Israel required to do?
International humanitarian law is quite clear that Israel, like any country, cannot deny adequate food and medicine to those under siege. They do have an obligation to allow as much aid as necessary to sustain the population. Israel has rejected that. Indeed, they have thrown out and banned reputable intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations that have had a strong record of humanitarian relief and have insisted on pushing this U.S.-backed so-called Gaza humanitarian initiative, which is a militarized effort, and we've seen horrific results. Over 600 people have been killed lining up for food since this program started a couple of months ago. And that's why there's a broad consensus among the international aid community that this is illegitimate, and they need to return to allowing the reputable and experienced aid agencies to take over.
Yeah, we obviously have heard that Israel is rejecting criticism of how it's carrying out its operations and the delivery of humanitarian aid in Gaza. And Israel specifically is accusing Hamas of siphoning off much of the food that's being sent into the country. Is there any evidence of that aid being diverted in that fashion?
There is some evidence, but not extensive. The vast majority of the food has been reaching those who are in need. I mean, Hamas, of course, is an authoritarian and corrupt and terroristic entity. Most Gazans don't like them, don't want them to be in charge. But their medical services and other relief services have been doing generally an adequate job, given the obviously tight constraints on what they can do. And so there are a lot of horrible things that Hamas has done. Obviously, the October 7th attack that initiated this war and everything. But, one doesn't have to be an apologist for Hamas or even pro-Palestinian per se. Or one does not have to be anti-Israel, anti-Zionist to recognize that Israel is engaged in some serious war crimes here, both the denial of the food and medicine, and also the attacks on civilian targets. And so this is why you have these many nations, again, many traditionally pro-Israel, saying, "Hey, wait, this is enough. This is not justifiable." Hamas has agreed to release all the hostages in return for a ceasefire and withdrawal of Israeli occupation troops. And this is really where we need to be going.
And finally here, as we wrap up, I mean, obviously you pointed out the fact that the United States did not sign on to this joint statement. But do you think the fact that you have all of these other large countries, as you point out, traditionally pro-Israel nations, signing on to this kind of an agreement here, does it put any sort of pressure on the U.S. to rethink its position?
Under the current administration, of course, is not one that is too concerned about what other countries think of it. I mean, the Trump has very much believes we should go our own way and is less sensitive to international criticisms than previous presidents. At the same time, American public opinion, including among many Republicans, are concerned about the humanitarian crisis and U.S. culpability and what's going on. I mean, we're going to be looking back at this, I think, in the decades, the way we looked at U.S. support for Guatemala's genocide against the indigenous peoples in the early 1980s, or the various death squads and other repressive regimes the U.S. has supported during the Cold War. We did not look good. It did not really help our standing in the world, and most Americans looking back at those periods see these as moral travesties, and I think we're going to see the same thing here. So, the one hope, I think, is there will be enough moral pressure from the American people. Not a Israel bashing kind of thing. Not an ideological thing, unfairly targeting Israel, but insisting that Israel, like all nations, no more or less than any nations, a nation has a responsibility to abide by international humanitarian law and to end the famine that they have imposed on the country and the attacks on civilians.
All right, we appreciate your perspective as always. Professor Stephen Zunes from the University of San Francisco. Great to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you.